She came out of the anti-folk movement of the late 80s and is now releasing a new album inspired by her life with her late husband, Paul Williams. Our guest this week is Cindy Lee Berryhill on the VVN Music Podcast. Hi, and welcome to episode 32 of the VVN Music Podcast. I'm Roger Wink, and our guest today is singer-songwriter Cindy Lee Berryhill. Berryhill began her professional career as part of New York City's anti-folk movement, a term that she coined, which also included artists like Michelle Schacht, Beck, and Brenda Kahn. Her first album, Who's Gonna Save the World, was released in 1987 and was followed by Naked Movie Star in 1989. Berryhill's life, though, was very much defined over the next 2 decades by her relationship and eventual marriage to pioneering rock journalist Paul Williams, who started Crawdaddy Magazine in 1966. Just 3 years after the beginning of their relationship, Williams suffered a devastating bicycle accident that left him with a traumatic brain injury. While he mostly recovered, he later showed signs of early-onset dementia from which he would suffer over the final years of his life. Cindy Lee continued her career sporadically over those years, recording a number of albums and becoming a published fiction writer. She's now back with a new album, one of the best that I've heard this year, The Adventurist, in which she explores life and love through the eyes of someone who has had immeasurable ups and downs over the last few decades. It's hard to put into words how much I really like this album that you're getting ready to release. It's out this Friday.
Yes.
This is your first album in 9 or 10 years, during which time you went through personal tragedy, you were raising your son. How hard was it to get back to the writing and the recording?
It was really just, I would say the writing started happening about 6 years ago. And, when my husband, he was a creator of Crawdaddy Magazine, there became a point where I couldn't take care of him anymore. He started to fall into dementia. It was related to his brain injury, which he'd recovered from. And at that point, we raised money and we got him into a nursing home. And, my life had been on an extremely short tether. Because I was taking care of our young child and taking care of Paul, who needed a lot of assistance. And so it was difficult to go out or do anything. So when he went in the nursing home, it really, became a huge vacuum in my life. I had all this time. And, when you have time, the mind gets creative, and I felt like I wanted to write songs because I was seeing Paul every day at the nursing home, and I wanted to write songs that I could play for him and that he would enjoy, and that, how can I explain it? Like, go to the place where the muse is happy and, there's joy. That was it. Yeah.
Was it hard getting back into the music business per se, based on just the tremendous changes that have been going on over the last decade?
Oh, that's so true. The thing is that, 20-something years ago, my first couple of albums came out on Rhino Records, and that was a different era. That was an era where you were taken care of as an artist. Somebody reminded me, actually my sister reminded me that on my Rhino record deal, even though that was an independent little company, they bought me a stylist and took me out and bought, it was like, $1,000. And we went to like a bunch of thrift stores and stuff, and they bought me clothes, $1,000. It was a heap on the floor. I couldn't believe it was clothes. That was a different era where you were kind of suited up. And even on a little label like Rhino, there was this expectation that you were, going to be kind of crafted and taken care of a little. And then after those 2 records, around 94, I was on a little label called Cargo Records. Probably its best known artists were like Rocket from the Crypt and I'm blanking. Blink 182, Blink. So And at that point, then, it was a DIY. You were completely on your own. You made your record, but with a tiny little stipend of money, and you gathered a lot of favors from musicians, and you turned in what best you could. And then you were on your own. There was no tour support or any of that. So I was already well prepared from, the mid-90s on that's what I was in, that new world that already is. So I kind of came in at the end of that little era of like artists are taken care of with Rhino, but so I haven't expected it ever since. I mean, on this record, I did a Kickstarter fund, and I paid for everything, and then I took it to labels and said, "Do you want to put it out?" And my favorite label said yes.
Well, you also, now you have to contend with the whole change in how people are consuming music. Not so much CD and more streaming. And that's just a huge change, especially, I think, as far as income.
Yeah. Well, I was never one to make a ton of money on music. I think most artists would agree that we make most of our money on doing shows. And, but I have to say I got to be a witness to a canary in a coal mine situation with music. I don't know, it was about a year ago. I was hanging out, after a Dave Alvin show, so I was hanging out with Dave Alvin, and this guy comes in, and you know what, he's also this guy named Jack Tempchin. And he's not a well-known name, but this is the guy that wrote all those
the Eagles,
number of the big hits by the Eagles, exactly. So he came in, and three of us are chatting, and Dave kind of came right out and said, "So how are things going? With the shift in the way the business is?" And he goes, "I know you've always crossed the board. When everybody else was having a tough time, you always made money. Those songs just keep selling." And he said, "Yeah, but the last couple of years, since the Pandora thing and all this, it's gone down drastically. So if someone like Jack Tempchin with songs like Peaceful Easy Feeling are really feeling the hit real hard, that everybody else is too. Because that guy made money. That guy's, consistently made money on those songs."
Yeah, the whole landscape has changed so much, and it especially for lack of a better word, veteran or legacy artists, those who have been around for a while. It just is hitting really bad because the streaming seems to very much favor the younger artists. And they're also not paying, as far as pre-1972 recordings, to a lot of these artists any kind of royalties. So it's a really bad situation.
Yeah, that's a good point. For me, it doesn't really impact me so much because, I've always been a little independent artist. I pick up money at shows and stuff, haven't sold, a boatload of product as it is. So, for me, it's really just about getting back out and playing shows. I'm going to be out on the East Coast in June. In May, it looks like I'm going to be doing some shows on the West Coast. It looks like it may be with David Lindley, so that would be a lot of fun. I'm just going to say, so I'm sort of bootstrapping my way back up again. I was, a mother for so many years, and then taking care of my husband, and it's really just kind of a return to playing shows again.
I also saw, I think, yesterday that you're playing at the benefit around the first two band albums. Yeah,
really looking forward to that. I don't want to give any secrets away or anything, but I am doing it with two other women, and they're both willowy blondes. So it's going to be an interesting little trio singing one of the band songs. And it looks like there's going to be a great lineup on that show.
Yeah, it looked pretty tremendous.
Yeah, Carlene Carter just joined it, and Garth Hudson's on board, and Jackson Brown. That's going to be fun.
Yeah, that looked like it was going to be a pretty tremendous show. Your album is, as you have said, is a song cycle and is sort of dedicated to your late husband. How did you first meet?
We met at the Pantages Theater in Los Angeles. I don't want to go into a ton of detail, but let's just say this. I was on a date with a guy from San Diego, a surfer, and we went to the Pantages Theater in Los Angeles, drove all the way up. And as I was coming out of the restroom, I saw a group of friends. I started talking to them. They were all friends of Brian Wilson's from the Beach Boys. So like Andy Paley and I think David Leaf and just some people that knew him. And I met this guy, Paul Williams, and I'm like, it's funny to meet you. I was just reading your old Crawdaddy interviews with David Anderle around Brian Wilson and Smile, and we just had a great conversation. We met for lunch the next day, and he read me some of his book he was writing, and he was really fun to talk to.
And the rest is history. And now you, in effect, had 3 years together before he had his accident, correct?
Yeah, let's see, 92, 93, 94, 95. That's correct. 3 years before his accident happened. And we'd been living together for a year when he had his bike accident.
You had said, though, I think earlier in our conversation, that he did recover from that. It was later that other problems started to develop, correct?
That's correct. You look at it a lot. It's a lot like the football players, and in their case, it's multiple head injuries, and after a number of years, then they get early onset of dementia related to those head injuries. So with Paul, it was one large head injury, and in a recovery, there were some things that were a little different about him, but he went right back to writing books and doing lecture tours and so forth. And then 7 years later, he started to just slowly drop into dementia, and it was a mystery. It took us a long time to figure out what was going on. And it was at the same time that, the mystery was beginning to be revealed with football players as well. So
you have to wonder in this day and age with everything that's known how people can rationalize continuing to go out on the football field and risk suffering those kind of injuries.
Right.
Your song from your last album, the title song, Beloved Stranger, was inspired not only by the injury that Paul suffered, but also that you had started to realize that this was the type of injury that a lot of the soldiers were coming home from war. And, this is a subject that's close to my heart. Our daughter works for the VA and works with a lot of these people who have come home from war. And on the other side of that, she, for about 3 years, worked with the caregivers for these people. And I think a lot of people don't realize that the caregivers are a whole separate type of hero in this whole story.
No, that's so true. I mean, when you say that, it just reminds me of the day that after Paul's head injury, he was in the hospital for a month and a half, something like that. And I remember the day the doctor walked over to me and said, well, looks like it's all good now. We're going to send him home with you later today. I'm like, wait a minute. How am I supposed to, help him continue to get better? I feel for these caregivers that are, having to take care of, loved ones that are even in worse shape than what Paul was.
It's a whole area that nobody really realizes the strain and the stress and the importance of that job with these types of injuries.
It's true. I remember there was a little talk at the time that so many were coming home. I'm guessing around 2005, 2006. I remember hearing some talk radio where they discussed it a little bit, but it seems to have disappeared. I think about just these, thousands of families that are taking care of our wounded soldiers at home. It's still happening now.
Yes, it is. On the new album, one of my favorite cuts is the title cut, The Adventurist. How does that fall into the story of you and your life with Paul and so forth?
Well, I'm not really a confessional songwriter. So rather than telling our story, I really wanted to get into the spirit of something that I shared with Paul. We shared a love for music. and this kind of a place that some of our artists would go to, our favorite artists would go to, where it was really muse inspired, and someone for me that the two of us shared a love of is like Brian Wilson and his work, and I wanted to have songs that felt like they could be a vehicle for this kind of muse inspired feeling of love and my great love of arrangements. I've always loved soundtracks. I love, Pet Sounds and Smile, Beach Boys. I've always had this love for arrangements. And the first album that I explored that on was Garage Orchestra back in 1994. And that was around the time that I was writing those songs when I met Paul. And then these songs, whereas Paul was kind of fading out. But it was still that same place where I wanted to go to my happy place. I was not going to tell the sad tale. I really wanted to explore the feelings of love and the muse-inspired place that artists go to. And so The Adventurist is really the story of, picking up the mantle and going on a quest of hunting for the holy grail of great songness, That's what the song's really about. And falling in love, the kind of crazy thing that happens when you fall in love and you're really on an adventure, aren't you? It's going to shatter your life the way it was, and it's going to reinvent it. It's going to be something brand new. That's what happens when we fall in love with people, places, and things.
So were you the protagonist that hit the Adventurist in that song?
Yeah. I would say I was the protagonist. I was the Adventurist had already been living a life of adventure, and then the protagonist comes along and says, "Hey, I want some of that too."
I hate to throw my own interpretation on other people's writing because I can obviously be wrong, but there are so many spots in this album where I was just sitting there thinking, now does this have to do with that, or could it possibly be this? Trying to interpret things. Yeah.
I get it. Like, how does it fit into her story? I think we all do that, right? We hear an album like, of course, that album that came out like after Kurt Cobain died, it was Courtney Love's band. It's like, I remember like listening to it and thinking, that totally applies to her loss of Kurt, and
But I think back to when I was in school and I, you would take literature classes and they would say, well, interpret this part of the story. And I'm like, it's the author's interpretation. It's the author's writing. I'm not sure I have any right to be interpreting it.
Well put. Yeah, so I don't have to write that paper for my professor because it's just completely subjective. So what's the use?
You mentioned the arrangements on the album and the use of different instruments, and that's one of my favorite parts of it is the instrumentation and the arrangements and everything from the use of the glockenspiel to setting the beat on deep sea fishing with a dishwasher. How did that come about?
Well, I just sitting in my place listening to that dishwasher, and I thought, dang, that's a good beat. So I remember like kind of playing some chords with it, and I thought, wow, I got to record it. I just recorded it with my iPhone, to be honest. And I took it to my friend Lee Ray, and I said, man, let's take this recording and put it on your hard drive and see if, we can come up with something to go with it. And he's like, okay. So he looped it. He does a kind of electronic music and stuff. So he made a loop with it. And he's like, well, why don't you just play some chords over it? So I have to say that he kind of pulled it out of me. And, as if you listen to it, it's actually the chords. The reason why it's called Deep Sea Dishing, it's the same chords as the song Deep Sea Fishing. So I just, slowed the chords down, made it go with the dishwasher beat. And I love found objects, man. I love that kind of, that Dadaist aspect that music can have, where you found a weird sound and you add it. So it made a lot of sense. And I have that also with like another couple of songs I use, like they replaced the wall heater in my apartment, and I'm like, we can't throw that wall heater, cover out. That thing sounds frickin' great. So it's this huge, like 7-foot tall thing, and we used it on a couple of songs, most notably on Horsepower. So if you listen to that song and you hear this big rattling sound that has a beat to it, it's the wall heater.
It's great when artists do things like that. I mean, there's so much, how can I put this? Just standard, regular, run-of-the-mill music that's out there, and I love when somebody does something different like that. I mean, it's the way I felt when I first heard Talking Heads, and for a lot of their career, it was like, this music is really different from the majority of what's out there, and that's how I felt about your arrangements on this.
All right, that's great. That makes me very happy. I delight in sounds, I mean, some of us are, it's all about visuals and what we see. And for me, it's like, I just love all the nuances of sound in life, and when I have my head on straight, I think, oh, that's a great sound. I'm going to record it. I'll use it somewhere. It's so much, it's fun.
You recorded the album live in studio with all of the musicians present, and I assume playing at one time compared to what seems to be the new norm, which is, having people from all over the world sending their little sound files and assembling it somewhere in a studio somewhere.
Yeah, to me, I look at music as it's a communal experience, and we know that experience when we go see a band live and us in the audience and the musicians have this vibe going together, But it can be like that in the studio, and that's one of my favorite experiences. It's a party. You're playing together, you're inventing together at the same time. Actually, yeah, the Adventurist is a good example of it. We had about 8 people playing at the same time, including DJ Bonebrick. So he was in there with us in the room, and he was playing the mallet instruments, I think the marimba on that one. And, so we have to have a good take. We had to go through it enough times where we got the arrangement to really solidify and gel. Actually, on that song, there's 2 bass players playing at the same time as well, which I have to say I kind of stole that idea from Brian Wilson, because he would often have 2 players, like a bass player playing higher notes and one playing the more traditional lower notes. So when the 2 bass players showed up for the recording, one of them said to me, like, oh, you don't need a bass player. You've already got one. I'm like, we need both.
I think there is a trend, though, starting to go back to recording more live in the studio. I've talked to a number of artists who are doing it, and just yesterday I wrote an article, and this was a really strange combination when I saw it, is that there's a new album coming out recorded completely live in the studio with Bare Naked Ladies and the Persuasions.
Oh, great.
And the Persuasions with the Bare Naked Ladies is such a strange combination, but from the electronic press kit I saw, it's going to sound like an amazing album. That
sounds great. No, I think, as musicians, we want to have a good time. We want to have a party. And, if we can get a bunch of people together in a room or two and make something sound good, that's like one of the best times on earth. It's a party. And, I remember my first producer on my first record said to me, it always stuck with me, he says, you can hear smiles on tape. And I think there's something to that. You can hear when the musicians are having a good time. I did do like a couple of the songs with, I had a co-producer on a number of the songs. And on this one, he wanted us to take it to do little pieces and then bring them together, the more traditional way nowadays, where, you bring a couple of studio musicians in and then a few days later a couple more or whatever. And, that's just not a lot of fun for me. So I'm like, I want to go back to this other way. Just everybody hanging out. I mean, surprises happen. And, I'm a true believer too. This is sort of like a weird, like a Phil Spector idea, where you get sounds together in a room and the sound waves interact with each other. So you get these weird tonalities that are, working together and creating like weird harmonics. And, I like that stuff.
I know you've said that you learned from Brian Wilson that the idea of getting big sounds but doing it with smaller ensembles, which I think you applied here in a number of cases. How did you get to know Brian Wilson? Was it basically through the Southern California music community, or was it some other way?
Well, I was just a fan of his work. I was one of those that had tape cassettes of all the unreleased sessions. So, and I met a lot of people around Brian. Like Paul knew him. My husband Paul knew him. And I met friends. I just kept meeting, people around Brian Wilson. I actually met Carl Wilson at a gig once before I met Brian. And I guess it was around 95. Paul had an interview with him for a magazine. So we went up to his place in L.A. and I didn't know them. So I said, look, I'm going to sit in the car and all I need to do is sit out here with my guitar and I'll just feed off the vibes radiating out of the house, man. And Paul was in there interviewing him and this maid came out and she said, Mrs. Wilson said, that she saw you sitting out in the car. She said, come in and hang out. So, Melinda Wilson and I, got to know each other and she would invite me up to the house. So I went up there about 4 or 5 times, just hung out with her and then she had me play songs for Brian and yeah, it's interesting.
It's not unusual for albums to be sequenced with the strongest material at the beginning and for lack of a better word, the weaker material towards the end. And with this album, 4 of my very favorite songs are the last 4. They're so strong that run from the heavy to an affair of the heart. And
wow.
I just think that sequence of 4 songs are just, they're really well written.
Yeah.
They are very memorable as far as the actual melody is concerned. And it was an interesting, observation as far as the album goes.
Interesting. I'm trying to think of, okay, so it's the heavy and then Deep Sea Fishing, Gravity Falls, and then the last one, Affair of the Heart. Yeah. I think those songs, it felt like after the heavy, there's a vibe that starts winding down a little bit and they're a little less perky. And I feel like as a listener, I kind of like it when you get taken on a journey and it feels like the journey starts to wind down. Then it ends with the dishwasher song, which is a kind of a contemplative, quiet. To me, it's like an Eric Satie kind of a tune, just a quiet easing out of the record. So I don't know, like how to put it together. It's always a mystery, right? How pieces come together. I knew that I wanted the song, which is probably the heaviest song of the record, the one called Somebody's Angel, which, is more, storytelling than anything else on the album. And closer to my story, I wanted to get that one out and done early, and then we can party the rest of the time.
I was actually going to ask you about Somebody's Angel and a little about the background on the song and everything. And somewhere I read, and I cannot remember who the artist was that you kind of triggered that song for you.
Yeah, it was kind of triggered by a song called Ruby Don't Take Your Love to Town.
That's what it was.
And, the truth is, my song is pretty confessional. I put a couple of traps in there that helped me to feel like it wasn't my story. One of them is it's closer to the story of like Beloved Stranger, where it's again about a soldier that comes home from war that with some kind of an injury and the song also mentions that they're dying And I thought, I'm going to have this be Ruby's story. It's not my story. So Ruby's husband came home from a war and was laid up and couldn't do the normal things a person can. So it helped me to put it in that perspective rather than telling my own story, because I just too close. That was too heavy. But if I put it in this other, if I couched it in another way, then I could be really honest about it. And it's a weird story in a way, isn't it? I mean, there's a little mystery in there. She's taking care of him, so she's somebody's angel, but it's also, her wanting to have a life, a sexual and a life, full life that any young woman would want.
Yeah, the word I want to use is there's a certain humanity in it. I'm not sure that's the exact correct word, but it's a reality of people's wants and needs.
Yeah, exactly. It's back to what we were talking about earlier about caregivers. A caregiver has to have a life. It can't be all about, you're really not a martyr. You're still a whole human being. And, you have needs that have to be taken care of. And if you don't take care of your needs, it's back to that old cliche about, the airline in trouble and then those breathing tubes fall down, and do you give it to your kid first or do you give it to yourself? Well, you have to take the oxygen first before you can help the next person. So that caregiver has to take care of herself and make sure she stays in sanity. And, and that song's really kind of about that.
How long have you been working with cellist, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Renata Bratt? It seems like I've seen videos and recordings for a number of years.
Yeah, you have. Yeah, she's been a collaborator since '93, and she's great. She was a part of the Garage Orchestra when we were actively playing shows together. I guess I met her in '92, and then she was on the Garage Orchestra album, and we've done a lot of touring and playing shows together, and she's been on a number of the records. And she has a full career of her own outside of just playing with me. She's well known for being a fiddle cellist, actually, which, you can picture in your mind what a violin does when it fiddles. A lot of notes and a lot of improvising, and so Renata does that with cello playing. And she's also written a number of Mel Bay books about how you play cello in that fiddle way. So she's pretty well known in that circle of things.
Obviously this album had a very specific subject, feel, purpose that you were really looking for, and you couldn't venture into political territory, which you have done often in the past.
Isn't it ironic that the timing I come out with this completely hands-off politics album? It's the most startling political time of our lives.
That's what I was just going to say. With everything that's happening right now in the world, I can imagine that you must be fairly busy writing new songs.
Yeah, you could say that. I'm. Let's put it this way: it's like I've let the ground go for a year or so, and I can see the seeds wanting to start to sprout up, but not quite yet. Usually it takes time for me to get back into the place where I'm writing songs again, and that means I need to go on the road right now, and I'm still completely full of this record. It's just such a crazy time, and it's such a weird time to put out an album that's all about, it's a personal journey. It's a journey about love and desire and those goody type things of life, coming out at a time where, the way I'm looking at it, like I did a show last month with David Lindley, and before our show, he said to me, well, what do you think with all the politics and stuff going on? Do you think we should talk about this stuff tonight? And I thought it was interesting that he would even ask me. I'm just the opening act, right? I go, here's my feeling about it. It's heavy out there right now. I mean, I can't stop watching the news. I can't stop wanting to know what crazy thing is going to pop up in the news this morning. Every morning it's like that. I go, David, this is my feeling. I'm going to lay off of it, and I'm going to give people a break because I need a break. And he goes, I was thinking the exact same thing. And so let's look at it like this. My new album is a break. If you want to take 45 minutes out of your day and listen to something lovely, then my new album will provide that. And then you can go back to looking at the news, and we can worry about health care. So...
Well, I'm sure you've been asked this 100 times recently, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You recorded a song back in 1989 on the Naked Orchestra album called Trump. Should we be blaming you for everything?
Hey, man, I was the prophet of doom. I tried to warn you a long time ago. Yeah, that was on the Naked Movie Star record. I was living in New York City. Nobody in New York liked him. I mean, he was a buffoon, and he wasn't, taking care of the people that were his tenants. And, everyone in the city could see that. Yeah, it's crazy I put out that song in 1989, and it's still, God, it's really sad how relevant it is today. I mean, it's weird that I even, use part of the preamble in it and that it's, saying stuff that almost hints at him being presidential. Oh, God. So awful.
You were prophetic.
Yeah, sad to say.
As I said, I know you're playing the band tribute show, and you mentioned you had some East Coast dates coming up. Do you have a lot of touring behind the album planned?
Yeah, in June I'll be doing the East Coast dates. I'm still putting those together. And in May it looks like I'm going to be doing the West Coast, and those are very likely going to be some shows with David Lindley. Those are just coming together right now. And then in August I'm going to do with Dave Alvin and some other folks, I'm going to do Roots on the Rails. So I'm going to do about a week worth of dates on a train. That's going to be fun. I'm going to take my kid with me. So what you do is there's 5 cars, and, they hook them up to an Amtrak train, but people buy like a week or two worth of, riding on these cars, and then they get to see shows by like me, Dave Alvin, he's had a number of other artists on there. We do shows, and then at night we pull into town and we're playing St. Louis, and then we get back on the car, sleep that night as it rolls through the next town and play somewhere else, and shows during the day on the cars.
That actually sounds fantastic.
I can't wait. I mean, I love trains. I love being on trains. My son, who's 15 now, but when he was a little kid, he had all the trains memorized. He was crazy about trains. So I'm going to take him with me on this. It'll be memorable at the very least.
Plus, you get to see so much of the country, even if it's through the windows. You get to see so much of the country that no one else really sees because of where those train tracks are laid, Yeah,
I love that about trains. I think, for me, Disneyland is a train. I mean, I just want to, I don't want to pay to go to an amusement park. I'd much rather just pay to go on a train ride. And then to get to play music at the same time, that's going to be great.
It's a variation, one that I hadn't heard of before, on these whole new cruise things that are going on, where a number of artists get on and play shows all through the cruise. So that really is interesting. I like that concept.
Yeah, me too. I don't know why cruises seem less interesting to me. I feel like cruises, you're just on a freaking boat and you're just sitting around and eating food all the time. I don't know. I guess that's what you do that on a train too, but on a boat, I guess it's mostly just you get to see water. And I live next to the water, so I see that every day.
Yeah, I know that back, I want to say in the late 90s, you published a book. Any thoughts of doing any further non-musical writing?
Oh, thanks for asking. Yeah, I'm putting together, when Paul was going through his last years of dementia and was living in the nursing home, for about 4 or 5 years, I was writing about that experience, and I kept a blog. Like, I did a lot of writing at that time, and I'm collecting those pieces now and putting them together in a book form. So that will be the next piece of writing that will come out. I need to go to New York and talk to some publisher friends. But right now, my job is kind of culling all the better pieces. I had a lot of followers of writing that blog. I think, it's interesting. A lot of people wrote to me about caring for their parents and other people in their lives. And there's just a lot of people out there that are doing caretaking. So this would be something for them. And I always try to keep it, even though the subject matter was heavy, I would always try to, keep a philosophical and light side to it.
Well, hopefully with that project coming up next, but hopefully it won't be 10 years before we hear another album from you.
I know. It was 5 or 6 years. Well, it was 5 years ago I started writing these songs. And I guess I'm just sort of, I work at a snail's pace, but I mean, I finished recording them, but then I had to find the record company to put them out. So, unless you're an artist that just is always in the middle of, record companies, and doing things, then it's a little harder. I'm kind of off the beaten path. We're way down here in San Diego County, so things take a little longer.
Cindy Lee Berryhill's new album, The Adventurist, is available now. We'll be back soon with more editions of the VVN Music Podcast, including talks with guests including Michael Schenker and Steve Hackett. Remember that you can hear the VVN Music Podcast via iHeartRadio, YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Libsyn, and the VVN Music website. For the latest news on the veteran artists of rock, pop, soul, country, folk, and blues, go to vvnmusic.com. If you have any comments or questions about the website or this podcast, please send them to vvnnetwork@gmail.com. Our theme music is performed by Yahar. This program was recorded on March 13th, 2017. The VVN Music Podcast is a production of the VVN Network, copyright 2017.